My daughter-in-law stole my credit card for $53,000 and went on vacation. I quietly waited, then did what she never expected. I used to think love could be measured in casseroles. The warmth of a kitchen filled with the scent of thyme and browned butter, a ceramic dish resting carefully on a folded towel in the back seat as you drive to your son's house, hoping the sauce hasn't spilled. That's how I showed love, for years, through gestures, quiet and constant. When Ben married Sarah, I welcomed her with open arms and a tray of lemon poppy seed muffins. She complimented the glaze, said it was cute, then barely touched hers. I ignored the coldness. I chose to believe we were still building something. I watched their golden retriever, Scout, during their honeymoon. Walked him twice a day, brushed his fur, even bought those expensive treats Sarah had mentioned once offhandedly. They never offered to reimburse me, but I didn't expect it. I was their foundation, mothers are supposed to be. Every Sunday, I cooked dinner. Pot roast, green beans, mashed potatoes. I used my vintage china set for the first time in years, ivory with thin gold rims, a gift from my own mother on my wedding day. Sarah said it was retro. I took it as a compliment. Then came the barbecue. It was late June. The garden was in full bloom, lavender, peonies, marigolds crowding the air with perfume. I wore a pale blue dress and brought a rhubarb pie. Sarah opened the door with a smile that never reached her eyes. She said, "Thanks, Laura," and took the pie. That was it. Just those two words, clipped, sterile. She turned before I could answer. I stood in the foyer with my hands still hovering in the air. Later, as the sun dipped and laughter floated from the backyard, Ben brushed past me near the grill. "Don't mind her," he said under his breath. "She's just tired." I didn't reply. I knew tiredness. This wasn't that. That night, alone in my quiet kitchen, I washed the pie dish by hand. The blue dress still smelled of charcoal and lilies. I dried the dish with a linen towel and placed it back in the cabinet. Then I sat down and made a list. Not of grievances. Just moments. Just small, sinking things I didn't want to forget. I added to the list in pencil. It felt less final that way, as if erasing them might still be an option. April 3rd, Sarah forgot my birthday. May 9th, she said my gravy was an acquired taste. June 1st, asked me to babysit Scout again. Didn't say thank you. I tucked the paper in my drawer, beneath the linen napkins I only used for guests. There was no anger in me then, only a slow, aching clarity. The next few weeks moved like water over stone, eroding quietly. Sarah had begun inviting me to help plan their social calendar, though inviting might be too generous a word. She texted me during her salon appointments. "Could you set up something for Scout and that doodle mix from last week? You know, the one with the pink collar. I need a break." There was no greeting. No please. I made the call anyway. They met at the park. I packed a thermos of coffee, thinking I'd sit and enjoy the air. Sarah didn't show. Just the dog walker. She'd delegated my invitation to the pet. At Sunday dinner, Sarah documented my roast chicken on her phone before eating. Later, I saw the photo on Instagram under her caption. "Love our farm-to-table Sundays, face-savoring food #homegrown #slow living." No mention of me. Of the hours I'd spent basting, seasoning, making sure the skin crisped just enough. Ben scrolled on his phone, quiet, tired. When I told a story about his first day of kindergarten, how he'd refused to wear socks, claiming he wanted his ankles to breathe, Sarah rolled her eyes and muttered, "Again?" Ben said nothing. I looked at him. My son. My freckled, bookish boy who once insisted I tuck in his blankets like armor. Now he sat across from me, sipping wine Sarah liked and nodding along to her discomforts like they were weather. One Thursday, I stopped by unannounced to drop off a sewing kit Sarah had once admired. She answered in a robe, her hair wet, her expression startled, displeased. "Oh," she said, blocking the doorway. "Ben's not here. And I have a Zoom call soon." I handed her the package. She took it like it was ticking. Said, "Thanks, I guess," then closed the door before I could ask about the weekend. I drove home with the radio off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into the small room at the back of the house, the one with the pale yellow walls and the antique desk. Once Ben's nursery, then my study, and now, a place I rarely entered. I stood by the window for a long time. The house creaked gently around me, wood shifting in its old bones. And that was when I found the message. Ben had left his phone charging beside the guest room bed after helping me change a light fixture. He'd gone out to pick up takeout, left in a rush. Out of habit, I tapped the screen. One message lit up. "Beach villas in Bimini are amazing, thanks for the $53,000, Mom. Sarah." I stood frozen. The air went thin. My hands, once so steady, trembled slightly. I sat down at the edge of the bed, eyes locked on the phone like it might erase itself. A second message followed. "Rolex for Ben is perfect. He has no idea you're covering it, winking face." My breath caught in my throat. No arguments. No confrontation. I just stood up, walked to the filing cabinet in my study, and pulled out my bank statements. I spent the rest of the night combing through every line. Private spa weekends. Designer handbags. Jewelry. Boat tours. Hotel charges from cities I'd never visited. The amounts weren't subtle. Sarah wasn't hiding. She was counting on my silence. The illusion shattered. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I brewed tea. Sat in my old armchair. Pulled a legal folder from the bottom drawer marked Lakeview Consulting, Archives. My late husband, Mark, and I had built that firm from our garage. He was the strategist, I was the operations mind. We sold it a year before he passed. But I had kept certain assets. Stock. An annuity. A quiet portfolio we never disclosed. I called my attorney the next morning. Told her we needed to update Access. She didn't ask questions. She'd always known Mark, and I built with caution. The next night, I froze every card connected to the trust. Changed passwords. Drafted a ledger of expenditures under Sarah's name. Then I sent a calendar invite. Dinner. Our house. Their anniversary. Casual subject line. Ben responded, "Sounds great, Mom," smiling face with smiling eyes. Sarah said nothing. I spent the weekend printing invoices. Yacht rentals. Aspen. 2 first-class flights to Paris. A luxury villa with chef on site. I highlighted each in quiet yellow. Sunday arrived cool and overcast. I wore a soft gray blouse, pressed my slacks. The dining table was set simply: rosemary chicken, roasted carrots, a lemon tart. The air smelled like home. They arrived 15 minutes late. Sarah kissed my cheek as if nothing had passed. Ben brought wine. The meal was polite. Small talk about neighbors. Weather. Sarah laughed a bit too loud. Then, as Ben reached for his second glass, I slid the manila folder across the table. Neither moved. Ben looked at me, puzzled. Sarah kept smiling. "It's your anniversary," I said. "Thought you'd want to see what you've built together." Ben opened the folder. His brows knit, page by page. Sarah sipped wine. Then saw the statements. This is a misunderstanding," she stammered. "You know how banks mislabel things. Sometimes I put things on the wrong card." Ben stared at the page showing the Rolex. "You said it was a promotion gift, from your uncle," he whispered. Sarah's smile twitched. Ben's eyes didn't leave the documents. "You took $53,000, he said. "From my mother?" Sarah's voice rose, then faltered. "It wasn't like that." She offered. "Remember?" She said, "Use what you need." She wanted us to be comfortable. I said nothing. Just refilled my water glass. The quiet stretched. Long enough to see the shape of everything. Sarah's eyes flicked from me to Ben. You knew we were building a life, she snapped. She doesn't even need the money. Look at this house. Ben pushed the folder toward her. You lied, he said simply. She stood, muttering. Grabbed her purse. You're all just manipulative. This whole dinner. I stood as well. I'm not pressing charges, I said evenly. But here are the terms. I handed her a typed sheet. Full repayment within 6 months. Waive all claims to my estate. No access to Lakeview Consulting, now or in the future. No further contact after repayment. Sarah stared. Ben said nothing. I'm done being part of your story, I said. Now you'll be stepping out of mine. Sarah left without another word. Her heels clacked down the hallway like punctuation. The door closed sharply behind her. Not slammed, but with just enough force to suggest wounded pride. I remained standing. Ben hadn't moved. He looked not at me, but at the edge of the table, the place where the manila folder sat now, its corners beginning to curl. I didn't know, he said finally. I believed him. But that didn't matter now. Silence, over time, becomes complicity. And Ben had been silent too long. I walked over to the sink and poured water into a glass. My movements were slow, not out of theatrics, but habit. I had always done things with care. That was my way. It had made me easy to overlook. He spoke again, voice low. She said the charges were covered by the business, by consulting perks. She said you approved. I sipped. And you didn't ask? His mouth opened. Closed. He shook his head. I guess I wanted to believe her. There it was. Not malice, but convenience. The kind that corrodes. I walked over to the mantel and straightened a frame. It was a picture of Mark, taken the year before he passed. He was wearing that awful striped polo he loved, standing on the deck of the cabin we used to rent each August. The sunlight was in his eyes. He had squinted, smiling wide. I'm selling the house, I said. Ben looked up sharply. What? This house? I nodded. I've already spoken to the agent. I found a condo near Lake Nokomis. Smaller. Enough. He blinked, stunned. But this is our home. No, I said gently. It was mine and your father's. And now it's just mine. For a few more weeks. He looked around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked. I thought about the question. Because I needed to see what you would do with the silence. He lowered his eyes. I returned to my chair and folded my hands. I'm not angry, I said. Not anymore. But I won't be an open drawer you reach into. Not even for you. He nodded. Slowly. The nod of someone absorbing a truth too large to hold in one hand. I'll talk to Sarah, he said. I didn't respond. She'll pay it back. She'll try, I said. Or she won't. Either way, I'll be fine. He sat with that. A long pause. Then, what happens now? You go home, I said. And I finish my tart. He didn't laugh, though his mouth twitched like it wanted to. That night, after he left, I packed 2 boxes, photo albums, recipe cards, my mother's brooch. I labeled them in neat script, keep. I didn't touch the rest. The house would wait. The next morning, I called the bank and finalized the credit freezes. I spoke with the realtor. Toured the lakeside condo one more time. It had a narrow balcony and creaked when you stepped near the hall radiator. Perfect. By Friday, the listing was live. Sarah sent a wire of $3,000, first payment. No note. No apology. Just the transaction. It was enough. Ben called twice. I didn't answer. He left voicemails that started, "Hey, Mom," and ended with nothing at all. I moved into the condo 2 weeks later. The light there was different, quieter, somehow. Less reflective, more embracing. I unpacked only what I loved. A few days in, I joined a photography club at the local community center. My hands, once calloused from cooking and typing and folding linens, adjusted to the weight of a camera with surprising ease. I photographed benches, ripples in the lake, children's shoes lined up at the water's edge. Life, as it was, without staging. An old college friend, Meredith, spotted one of my photos online and invited me to a small gathering. We drank rose on a patio with twinkle lights and nobody asked me about Ben or Sarah. We talked about books, about terrible local weather, about the taste of plums in July. At night, I read. I slept without dreaming. I woke with a strange lightness. A month passed. Then another. Sarah sent 2 more payments. No contact beyond the wires. I changed my number soon after. Then, one morning, I opened my email to find a message from a sender I didn't recognize at first. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." It was from Sarah. A long letter. Apologies. Explanations. Rewriting history in that way the guilty often do, softly, vaguely, with adjectives meant to blur the outline of what they'd taken. I read it. Once. Then deleted it. No anger. Just space. A week later, a package arrived at the community center. No note inside, only a velvet box containing my vintage china, intact. Cleaned. I left it unopened in my hall closet. Instead, I attended the photography showcase that night. 3 of my photos hung in the back room, simple, unassuming shots of park benches, a half-eaten pastry, a child's shadow on brick. Someone asked about them. I just smiled. Said they were little moments I didn't want to forget. That was enough. The first snowfall arrived early that year. It blanketed the lake like an afterthought, light and uneven, barely settling on the dock rails but thick enough to hush the city. From my condo window, I watched the flakes drift down, slow, unhurried, like they had no particular place to be. I sipped my tea, lukewarm now. I'd stopped heating it past a certain hour. Mornings were for warmth. Afternoons for quiet. It had been almost 3 months since that final dinner, since the folder of charges slid across the linen table runner. I hadn't spoken to Sarah since, aside from the monthly wire receipts that arrived on the 1st. No messages attached. Just a number. Sometimes she paid early. Sometimes late. Once, she overpaid by $17. Ben sent cards. Birthday. Thanksgiving. A small note in October, "Hope the new place feels like home." I read them all, then placed them in a drawer with no label. I didn't throw them away. But I didn't answer, either. At Lakeview Consulting, my name still appeared on a few dormant papers. My husband's legacy in the footnotes of mid-sized tech acquisitions. I'd kept just enough ownership to ensure a quarterly dividend, modest and steady. Enough for rent, groceries, and small pleasures. I'd withdrawn from board correspondence gradually. First, by stepping back from emails. Then by declining Zoom invites. Eventually, they stopped reaching out. That suited me fine. The parts of me that had once shaped strategies, coordinated teams, stayed folded in those legal folders upstairs, behind a locked drawer. I had no desire to open them. Most days, I walked the lake path. I learned to notice the way shadows shifted by season. Where the ducks gathered when the wind picked up. Which bench caught the last of the sun before it vanished behind the trees. One afternoon, a young woman in the photography club, Marisol, asked if I would teach her about aperture settings. She wore a red scarf and carried her camera like a child she wasn't quite sure she was ready for. We met at the cafe down the block, where the coffee came in thick mugs and no music played. I brought a notebook. She brought enthusiasm. As I explained exposure triangles and light metering, I realized how much of me had been stored in silent knowledge, years of precision and care, stowed away because no one had asked. She listened carefully. Took notes. Laughed at my story about Mark trying to photograph a picnic and accidentally shooting only his feet for half an hour. Later, she said, "I wish my mom was more like you." I smiled and changed the subject. That night, I took the long way home. Passed by the bookstore, bought a novel with a pale green cover and a title I couldn't pronounce. The man at the counter asked if I wanted a bag. I said no. It's strange, the freedom that comes from being no one in particular. No title. No responsibility. Just a woman in a blue wool coat walking alone in the snow. But sometimes, memory returns uninvited. Like the night I opened a drawer and found the china, wrapped in white linen, each plate resting in its original slot. Sarah had returned it with care. Too much care. I stared at it a long while, then closed the drawer. It wasn't regret I felt. It was the sharp ache of knowing something once cherished had become a relic of manipulation. I kept it. I'm not sure why. Maybe as a reminder. 2 weeks later, a letter came, not a wire, not an email. Handwritten. From Ben. He didn't ask to visit. Didn't ask for forgiveness. Just wrote. Mom. I see it all now. I see what I let happen. I don't know if there's a way back, or if you'd even want one. But I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I miss you. Love. Ben. I read it twice. Then I folded it slowly, placed it inside the back cover of a book I knew I'd never lend out. That weekend, Rebecca called. She had heard, somehow, that I had joined a club. Wanted to know if we could walk together sometime. Just the two of us. I said yes. She arrived bundled in a pea coat, scarf looped twice around her neck, her eyes the same as they'd been when she was 5, and asked me why the moon followed the car. We walked slowly. Talked about her job, her new apartment, the dishes she was learning to cook. She didn't mention her parents. Near the far end of the lake, we sat. After a while, she said, "You were always the only adult who listened when I said I was scared." I said nothing. She reached into her bag and handed me a small, square print, a photo she'd taken of the lake. Framed. On the back, she had written, "Thank you for choosing peace." I placed it on my shelf when I got home. Later that evening, I received another message. Sarah again. This time longer. A voice message. She cried through parts of it, spoke of therapy, of reflection, of new beginnings. Asked if we could meet. Said she wanted to apologize properly. I didn't delete it. I just didn't listen. It sat there, unheard, while I sat with my camera and watched the snow fall through the trees. Some things don't need responses. Some stories end not with confrontation, but with a quiet refusal to return. I began to understand stillness, not the kind you're forced into when the phone stops ringing, but the kind you choose. The kind that fills the room like light, quiet but firm. The kind that makes you sit longer in a chair after the kettle boils, watching steam curl into nothing. It was mid-January. The lake had frozen over. Children skated in borrowed boots while their parents stood nearby with thermoses. I passed them during my afternoon walk and felt something odd, not envy, not even nostalgia. Just distance. Like looking at a photograph of yourself and knowing it happened, but not remembering how it felt. Rebecca started coming by on Sundays. She brought grocery store tulips and mispronounced tea blends. We never made formal plans. She just knocked, holding something warm or wrapped in foil, and I'd let her in without comment. Sometimes we spoke about her work. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. She took to sitting in the corner chair by the window, watching the ducks huddle where the water hadn't frozen. Once she asked if I'd ever thought about writing things down, really writing. Not just ledgers and letters. I said no, but the idea stayed with me. That week, I bought a notebook. Cream pages, no lines. I didn't write much. A few phrases here and there. They only saw the open hand, never the tired wrist. Things like that. In early February, Ben emailed. A single line. Would it be all right if I stopped by? I read it twice. Then once more, for the silence tucked between the words. I didn't respond right away. I waited a full day before answering. Sunday. 2 p.m. Bring nothing. He arrived on time. Coat dusted with snow. No bags, no flowers, no rehearsed smile. I let him in and led him to the living room. The tartan throw was folded neatly. The teapot warm. I poured 2 cups and handed him his, wordless. He looked thinner. A little gray around the edges. I wondered if he noticed how soft my hands had become, no longer needing dough or wringing dish rags. We sat in quiet for several minutes. The way people do when they've run out of roles to play. Then, finally, he said, "She's moved out." I nodded. I didn't ask where, or how long ago. That wasn't my business. She took a job in California, he added. Said she needed a reset. I stirred my tea. I've been thinking about you, he said next. About how I let everything get managed around me. I raised my eyebrows, but said nothing. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was close enough to be recognized. He set his cup down. You were always the constant, Mom. And I treated you like background. That landed harder. Truer. I folded my hands in my lap. It's easy to ignore the person who makes the space feel safe. He looked down. I never saw it that way. No, I said. You didn't. He nodded. I'm sorry. I watched him carefully. The shape of his face hadn't changed much, still that slope in the nose, that twitch at the corner of his mouth when he meant something. I can't undo it, he said. But I'd like to start seeing you better. It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I rose, walked to the cabinet, and took down a small envelope. Inside was a note I had written months ago. Short. Firm. Clear. I handed it to him. He opened it slowly, read it twice. Then looked up. You want me to honor these terms too? He asked. Not angry. Just surprised. I do, I said. They weren't just for Sarah. They were for the structure that let her in. He nodded. After a pause, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pen, and signed. I'll get it notarized tomorrow. That, more than anything, meant something. He stayed another hour. Talked about Rebecca. About the condo. About nothing at all. When he left, I watched from the balcony as he walked down the path, slower than he used to. That evening, I made lentil soup and listened to the wind. No television. No radio. Just the hollow hum of a winter night wrapping its arms around the world. Later, I opened the notebook again. Wrote. Forgiveness isn't a return, it's a redirection. You can love someone and still walk away from the version of them that broke you. Then I closed it. 2 weeks passed. I didn't hear from Sarah again. Another wire came. Then nothing. Rebecca and I walked the art museum on a rainy Thursday. She pointed out a piece she liked, just a white canvas with one red circle in the center. It looks like a hole, she said. I tilted my head. Or an end. Or a beginning, she replied. I smiled. On the way home, she asked, do you think people change? I think people adjust, I said. But not everyone's meant to grow with you. She seemed satisfied with that. At home, I brewed orange tea and stared out at the gray sky. Somewhere, a woman I had once called daughter-in-law was probably explaining away her past, building something new with someone else. That was fine. Let her. Me, I had a camera, a quiet apartment, and enough clarity to know this much. Peace is not found in what others give. It's found in what you no longer need from them. Spring came slowly to Minneapolis. The lake thawed in uneven patches, and the trees hesitated before budding. I found myself checking the forecast each morning, not out of concern, but ritual. It's comforting, the idea that weather still follows patterns even when people don't. By now, my new rhythm had taken hold. Mornings began with light stretches by the window. Tea, not coffee. A walk if it wasn't raining. Then, often, a few hours reviewing applications for a local business grant I had anonymously funded through the city's Women's Entrepreneurship Council. My name wasn't on anything, but I read every story carefully: one ceramicist, one food truck owner, two tech startup hopefuls. Mark would have smiled at that. He used to say, "Power isn't in owning the room. It's in quietly choosing who gets the key." On the first Sunday of April, Ben came again. He brought a paper bag with tulips. Real ones this time. No plastic wrap. No supermarket tags. He said he got them from a roadside cart near St. Paul. He didn't stay long, just sat, spoke about his job. About the quiet in the house. Said Scout had grown clingy. I nodded. We both knew what wasn't being said. He didn't ask about Sarah. That told me everything I needed to know. At one point, he looked up from his tea and asked, "Do you ever think about selling the consulting shares?" I studied him, long enough for the silence to tighten. "No," I said simply. He nodded. Wasn't asking for me. Just wondering. I believed him. Mostly. He stood to leave, placing the tulips in a vase on the kitchen counter. "They need light," he said. "Morning light's best." After he left, I stood for a long time by the sink, watching the stems bend slightly, adjusting to their new water. A week later, I received an email from Lakeview Consulting's current director. They wanted to name a small conference room in Mark's honor, nothing grand, just a plaque and a framed photo. They asked for my blessing. I said yes. Then I asked if they could add a small quote beneath his name. "Build things that don't require your name to stand." They agreed. That evening, I visited the old office building. It felt different, more sterile now, more efficient. But still familiar. I stood quietly in the lobby, watching young employees pass with laptops and coffee, their lives moving quickly. None of them knew who I was. That was exactly how I wanted it. The plaque arrived a month later. I took a picture and sent it to Rebecca. She replied, "He would have liked that." "I think you would have too." I smiled. Some nights I still think of Sarah. Not with bitterness, just a soft, distant curiosity. Like recalling a play you once watched with an actor who tried too hard. Once, I searched her name online. Just once. Her social media had changed. Softer photos. Nature backdrops. A caption under a picture of waves: "Healing takes longer when you've hurt others too." I closed the tab. In early May, Rebecca brought her roommate over. A tall girl named June, soft-spoken, wore scarves even in the heat. They helped me repot the balcony plants. When we were done, they stayed for tea. As they left, June said, "It feels safe here." Rebecca looked at me and smiled. It always has. That night, I stood on the balcony and looked out over the lake. The water was still. The moon cut a perfect path across the surface. My phone buzzed once. A message from Sarah: "I'm in town. Can we talk?" One coffee. Just one. I didn't answer. Didn't even open the message fully. I deleted it. Then I poured a glass of water, turned off the lights, and stood quietly at the window. Outside, the breeze moved through the trees without struggle. Soft. Constant. I had no need for spectacle, no appetite for closure. Some things don't require a door to be slammed shut. A lock will do just fine. By mid-June, the lake shimmered. Every morning the light slipped through the blinds and scattered across my dining table like breadcrumbs from some gentler life. I followed that light with my teacup, letting it warm my hand as I read half a newspaper and ignored the rest. One morning, I received a letter. Not a bill. Not junk. A letter. Handwritten, on cream paper, addressed simply to Laura Mason. The handwriting wasn't familiar. The return address was a P.O. box in Sarasota. I read it slowly. Sarah had written. It was long, pages of cursive that leaned slightly left, uneven in places. She wrote of therapy. Of shame, though the word came late. She described the apartment she had rented above a bakery, how she volunteered on Sundays, how she'd read a book on boundaries that made her cry. She asked nothing. No forgiveness. No reunion. Only wrote, I was small and you were gracious, and I mistook that grace for permission. I folded the letter once, gently. I placed it between two cookbooks and went for a walk. Later that evening, I reread it. I still didn't cry. But I thought, for the first time, about how many women never learn what power looks like when it's silent. When it doesn't shout, accuse, or punish. When it just walks away. That's what I'd done. Walked. Quietly. And that silence had become its own kind of echo, filling spaces Sarah hadn't expected to hear her own voice bounce back from. The following week, the community center held a photography exhibit. I submitted 3 pieces, a child's shadow stretched across gravel, a broken bench repaired with twine, and a worn glove resting on a fence post after snowfall. I named them, Absence, Effort, and Remaining. Marisol, the young woman I'd mentored, brought her parents. They stopped in front of my photos and lingered. Her mother whispered something. Marisol looked back at me and smiled. You made something stay, she said later. It matters. I said thank you, but I wanted to say more. I wanted to say, I used to think staying meant holding on to people who hurt you. But staying can mean holding on to yourself, even when others let go. The next day, Ben called. Not a text. Not an email. A call. I let it ring once before answering. He asked if he could come by, no occasion, no pretense. I agreed. He arrived carrying nothing, which was the right choice. His voice was quieter now. His questions gentler. We sat on the balcony. The lake moved in small ripples, restless but contained. He asked how I was. I told him the truth, peaceful. I'm learning that quiet isn't the same as absence, he said. It's not cold. It's complete. I looked at him. Did it take her leaving to know that? No, he said. It took you. We didn't say more for a while. As he stood to leave, he hesitated. Then, with a kind of boyish nervousness, asked, Can I come next Sunday? I nodded. He smiled, small and genuine. That night, I wrote in my notebook. Some sons come home after the house has changed shape. Some mothers stay in that new shape, not out of bitterness, but self-preservation. And if love finds its way back, it knocks, not demands. Ben came the next Sunday. And the one after that. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes just himself. I let him speak. I didn't ask about the past. We'd already stood at the fire and chosen not to warm ourselves with its smoke. July brought thunder. Long, rolling storms that made the lake moan and the trees sway like dancers forgetting their steps. I loved the storms. They made the windows rattle and reminded me I was still in a body, still housed in something that could feel. Rebecca visited often. Sometimes she brought a friend, sometimes she sat cross-legged on my floor, organizing old photographs. One evening, she pointed to one from Ben's 10th birthday. You always made things feel bigger than they were, she said. Like every moment had weight. I didn't answer. I just patted her knee. Later, I put that photo in a new frame. Hung it near the door. By the end of July, Sarah sent a final transfer. No note. I marked the ledger, paid in full. I didn't feel triumphant. Just clean. Unburdened. I spent the evening rearranging the bookshelf. Not alphabetically, by color. Blues near greens, reds between the warm browns. It made no sense. It was beautiful. The next morning, I found myself smiling at nothing in particular. The apartment, for all its modesty, had become something better than a home. It had become proof. Proof that I had been right to leave, not with drama or fury, but with dignity. And that dignity, once claimed, could not be bought back with roses or regrets. The last Saturday of August arrived with a certain softness. The wind no longer pressed so sharply against the glass. The sun, while still present, carried a gentler light, more memory than heat. I walked the lake path slowly, watching as children abandoned sandals at the shore, dipping toes into water they'd soon outgrow. At the corner bench, I found a folded newspaper with the crossword half filled. Someone had written boldly in the margins, "Peace isn't passive. It's earned." I tore the page out carefully and slipped it into my notebook. When I returned home, the hallway felt warmer. Maybe it was the light. Or maybe it was something internal, some corner of grief finally turning loose, no longer pulling at the edges of each day. The condo was still. Not silent, but still. The kind of stillness that comes when nothing waits to erupt. No hidden resentments. No withheld apologies. Just space. Just breath. I stood at the window and saw Ben walking up the path. He carried a brown paper bag, probably rolls, or the white peaches I'd mentioned once in passing. He knocked lightly, even though I had told him he didn't need to. His presence no longer felt heavy. Just there. As it should have been all along. He handed me the bag. I didn't ask what was inside. We sat by the window. He told me about a project at work. How Scout had started sleeping on the side of the bed where Sarah used to lie. How silence wasn't so terrible, once you learned not to fill it with noise. I think, he said slowly, for a long time I believed love meant loyalty. But maybe it means clarity. I nodded. Sometimes love means leaving the door open, but locking the cabinets. He laughed, a short breath through the nose. You always did know how to cut through things. No, I said. I just learned how to stop softening the truth. We didn't talk about Sarah. That chapter had closed itself. Instead, he asked if I'd visit the old house. Just once. To see what it had become. I hesitated. Then said yes. We went the following Sunday. It was smaller than I remembered. The rose bush by the mailbox had overgrown. The shutters needed paint. The porch creaked like an old confession. But the bones were there. Inside, a new family had moved in. Ben had arranged a brief visit with their blessing. A young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever that barked twice before settling. The kitchen had been remodeled. My spice rack gone. But the window still caught the afternoon light perfectly across the counter. I stood in the living room. The walls were a lighter shade now. The carpet new. But I could still see it, the outline of a life. A woman folding linens. A boy at the table, legs swinging, asking if stars could blink. I touched the doorframe once. Then turned to Ben. Let's go. In the car, he didn't speak until we reached the stoplight near the bookstore. Was it hard? He asked. Walking away? I stared out the window. It was necessary. That made it easier. He didn't press further. And I was glad. Back at the condo, I unpacked a small bag I'd carried. Inside were 5 recipe cards I'd kept in my desk drawer. His favorites. In my handwriting. Slightly smudged at the edges from years of oil and steam. I handed them to him. He blinked. Mom. I won't be making them anymore. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be made. He held them like something precious. Not because of the food, but because of the care etched into the margins. That evening, I sat alone. Poured a glass of water. Turned on the small radio near the bookshelf. Soft jazz filled the room. The kind Mark used to hum to without knowing the words. And then, quietly, I danced. Slow, deliberate steps on the hardwood. Nothing showy. Just motion. Later, I wrote in my notebook. I spent decades asking to be included. In family plans. In conversations. In futures that weren't mine. Now I ask only for time. For sunlight. For mornings that begin and end with my own name. The next morning, the letter came. This time, it wasn't from Sarah. It was from her attorney. An official document releasing any future claim to Lakeview Consulting, to my estate, to any shared property or assets. Signed. Notarized. At the bottom was a note in smaller print. She asked that you not respond. She only wanted to make it official. I closed the envelope, slid it into a drawer, and exhaled. Not relief. Not victory. Something quieter. That evening, I stood on the balcony again. The air was warmer now, still touched by summer but with a whisper of what's next. As I looked over the water, a single phrase rose in my mind. Not a vow. Not a warning. Just a gentle truth. I didn't vanish. I just stepped out of their story. The days grew shorter. September slid into October like a slow breath. The air thinned, leaves shifted, and the lake, once clear and glittering, turned dense with reflection. I watched it most evenings from the balcony, still, watchful water beneath a soft, blurring sky. It was during one of those evenings, book on my lap, tea half-cooled, that my phone lit up again. Unknown number. But the area code was familiar. Local. I let it ring. The voicemail icon appeared, then disappeared. No message left. But a minute later, the text came. This time, it wasn't from Sarah. It was her mother. A woman I'd met only twice, once at the wedding and once in passing at a grocery store, neither time meaningful. The message was formal, almost brittle. Laura, I'm sorry to intrude. Sarah asked me to reach out. She's struggling. She misses Ben. She regrets everything. She says she's changed. She wants to know if there's still a bridge left to cross. I read it twice. Then put the phone down. I didn't reply. The next morning, I deleted it. Not in anger. Just in keeping with the pattern I'd chosen, silence as a boundary, not a weapon. That same week, I received a letter from the grant committee I'd quietly supported. They wanted to name the spring session after someone. Asked if I'd allow them to use my name. I declined. Instead, I suggested they name it the Quiet Start Fund. It sounded right, like the kind of beginning I wished someone had offered me, long ago. In late October, I hosted a small dinner. Just Rebecca, her roommate June, and Ben. I roasted squash, made rosemary biscuits, and laid out the old linen napkins I'd once kept for special occasions. It was the first time I'd cooked for anyone since Sarah. The meal was unremarkable. Pleasant. Laughter came gently. At one point, Ben offered to wash dishes. He stood at the sink, sleeves rolled, humming something tuneless. I dried. Neither of us said anything about the past. That was the gift. After they left, I found a note tucked under my coaster. Thanks for making the table feel whole again. Rebecca. I kept it in the back of my notebook. The following Sunday, I walked the neighborhood trail. A small boy passed me on a bike too large for him, wobbly and proud. His mother followed at a distance, calling out, "Slow down. Don't forget to brake." I smiled. Thought of Ben's first bike. Red with a loose bell. Thought of how hard I'd held the seat before letting go. I'd spent much of my life doing that, holding, then releasing. Never told to. Just trained by time, by the unspoken rule that mothers carry quietly, then step aside. But I had learned something else now. Sometimes, it's not about letting go. It's about choosing who gets to hold anything at all. A week later, I visited the Lakeview office again, this time unannounced. Not out of nostalgia. Just curiosity. The receptionist didn't recognize me. I didn't expect her to. I asked to sit briefly in the small lounge. She said yes, kindly. The room had changed. Sleeker chairs. Abstract art. But the plaque was still there, near the side hallway. Mark Mason Collaboration Room. The quote still beneath it. The gold lettering hadn't faded. A young woman came out, holding a laptop. She paused, looked at the plaque, then nodded slightly before continuing on. That was enough. I walked back out into the wind, pulling my coat tighter. On Halloween, I handed out candy for the first time in years. Wrapped butterscotch, licorice, miniature chocolate bars. Most kids barely looked up. One girl, dressed as a bumblebee, took her candy and whispered, "Thank you, nice lady," before running off. It startled me how warm that felt. Later, I lit a candle for Mark. No reason, no anniversary. Just the kind of small remembrance that steadies you. I sat with it for a long time, the flame flickering, the house still. My phone buzzed once. A message from Ben. No words. Just a photo. It was the recipe cards I'd given him, now framed and hung on his kitchen wall. Beneath it, a caption, every line in her handwriting, every ingredient a memory. I didn't respond. Just placed the phone face down and let the stillness return. In the days that followed, I started taking portraits, old women in the park, couples at the cafe, a man with a cane adjusting his scarf by the crosswalk. No one posed. I didn't ask. I just captured what passed through the light. The community center offered me a small exhibit space. I said yes. They asked what to title the show. I wrote back, remaining. Because that's what I had done. Through erasure, through betrayal, through quiet exits, I had remained. Not as someone's mother. Not as a cautionary tale. Just me. Laura. Whole. I stood on the balcony the evening the exhibit opened, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. From here, the lake reflected dusk in long, smooth strokes. I could hear faint sounds from the city, someone's dog barking, a bus sighing into motion, laughter from a balcony 2 floors down. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon. I'd baked something earlier, nothing fancy, just a loaf with ginger and molasses. A habit now. Something steady. The gallery had been kind to my photos. Clean white walls. Space. A simple printed title card beneath each, absence, effort, remaining, unattended bench, hands that hold nothing. People wandered through. Some paused. A few asked quiet questions. Most just looked. I stood to the side, anonymous. Exactly as I preferred. Later, Rebecca came. She brought flowers, awkwardly wrapped in butcher paper. She beamed like someone proud of their own mother, even if she'd never said those words aloud. She walked slowly past each photograph. Then turned to me. "You didn't caption the last one." "I didn't need to," I said. It was a photo of a single chair on the dock. No one sitting. Just the outline of shadow. The lake behind it calm, waiting. The sky already slipping into dusk. She looked at it a long time. Ben arrived later. Quiet, unassuming. He came alone. He nodded at me once, his eyes full. Then he walked the exhibit, hands in his pockets. He didn't linger near the photos. Just stood, observing, then came to my side. He said. "They're what you never said out loud." I nodded. That's the point. We didn't speak again that night. When the gallery closed, I returned home alone. Took off my shoes by the door. Opened a window. Let in the autumn air. There was one message on the answering machine. Sarah again. Her voice tentative. Softer than I remembered. She said she hoped I was well. That she'd seen the exhibit online. That she was happy for me. And then, before hanging up, she said, "I think you were the only person who saw me clearly. And I ruined that." I didn't save the message. I let it disappear into the soft mechanical hum of the machine. That night, I didn't write in the notebook. I didn't need to. I just stood at the window, watching the lake shimmer beneath the faint light of the street lamp. It looked almost like glass. Still. Untouched. And I murmured, not for anyone to hear, just to myself. I didn't vanish. I just stepped out of their story. And in doing so, found my own.